The 1990s. It still feels close, like it was just yesterday. But the start of that decade is now more than 30 years behind us. A time of major change. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Soviet Union. A world being reshaped. We were all glued to our TVs, from Home Alone to Twin Peaks, while The Simpsons broke through into the mainstream. The CD took over from the cassette. The Game Boy became a phenomenon. And in sports, we saw legends fade and new ones rise. But let's not talk about that right now, because we're only in it for the music. Today, we're counting down 10 essential debut albums from the early 1990s. Not randomly, but based on a fixed system. Each track gets a score from 0 to 10. We also rate the sound and production, the track sequence, and the album sleeve. Together, that forms the triple S factor.
It's a thing.
It's not a thing. Just like in our previous editions covering the 60s, 70s, and 80s, this results in a varied list, spread across the early years of the decade. Let's begin, number 10. What may seem like a side project from the Pixies quickly becomes something entirely its own on Pod. Kim Deal doesn't follow the rules here. She follows her instinct. The result? Raw, off-kilter alternative rock that's both infectious and unpredictable. The real breakthrough would come later with second album Last Splash and the hit Cannonball. But on Pod, you can already hear the foundation of the Breeders' sound. Even an unexpected cover of Happiness is a Warm Gun by the Beatles fits seamlessly into that world. And anyone who hears this as simply Pixies with a female singer is missing the point entirely. Yes, you can place the two bands side by side, but they're speaking completely different languages. Pod feels less like a beginning and more like a statement, a sound of their own from day one. From grungy alternative rock, we shift to the hazy hip-hop of Cypress Hill. Right from their self-titled debut, you hear a sound that refuses to conform. Dark beats, unconventional samples, and a mood that feels more psychedelic than street. What really sets this album apart are the subtle but ever-present Latin influences, an extra layer that gives their sound a distinct identity within early 90s hip-hop. You can hear it on Latin lingo, but also on tracks like Hand on the Pump and the funky Feel One. Just like with the Breeders, this debut isn't an endpoint, it's a starting point. In the years that follow, Cypress Hill would grow into one of the most recognizable and influential names in hip-hop. But this is where it begins, here at number 9.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number...
Britpop hasn't fully arrived yet, but its outlines are already visible on Blur's debut. On Leisure, you hear a band still balancing between dreamy shoegaze influences and a growing sense of British pop tradition. With tracks like She's So High and There's No Other Way, Blur already show a sharp instinct for hooks, but it's Sing that truly stands out. A slow, brooding, almost hypnotic track that would later find a second life in Train Spotting, and land just as powerfully there as it does on the album. The Britpop explosion, and the infamous clash with Oasis, is still years away, but beneath the surface, you can already hear it. A distinctly offbeat London band, with echoes of the Kinks and Madness, still searching, but with a clear sense of direction. At number 7, The Sundays with Reading, Writing, and Arithmetic, a debut built on melancholy, shimmering guitar work, and seemingly effortless melodies. With singles like Here's Where the Story Ends and Can't Be Sure, the tone is set immediately. But this album truly lives in the spaces between those moments. Where Blur still sounds angular, searching, and restless, this feels light and fluid, almost weightless. The jangly guitars and wistful undertone recall the Smiths, placing the Sundays in the same tradition as the Laws. No grand statements, no need to shout, just an album that slowly finds its way under your skin. It may not click instantly for everyone, but that only makes it more rewarding to discover. We make a musical leap to one of the foundations of what would later be known as trip-hop, Massive Attack with Blue Lines. A debut that immediately creates a world of its own. Slow, pulsing beats, cinematic strings, and a unique interplay between the raps of Tricky and the soulful vocals of Shara Nelson. On the original cover, the name appears simply as Massive, a temporary change during the Gulf War when Massive Attack felt just a little too close to what was being broadcast daily on CNN. But the impact of this album is anything but temporary. From openers Safe from Harm to singles like Daydreaming and Unfinished Sympathy, you hear a sound that seems to come from nowhere else. And especially Unfinished Sympathy stands out. A track that feels both expansive and intimate, driven entirely by mood, arrangement, and emotion. More than 30 years later, it hasn't lost any of its power. Sometimes a song appears that can't quite be explained, only felt. This is one of them. The 90s are often synonymous with grunge, but the Smashing Pumpkins never quite fit that label. They're not from Seattle, and their sound reaches far beyond that raw grunge aesthetic. Still, their debut Gish is absolutely one to write home about. With tracks like I Am One, Siva, Rhinoceros, and Tristessa, you hear a band carving out its own path from day one. The fact that Gish is often overshadowed by later albums like Siamese Dream and Melancholy and The Infinite Sadness says more about the exceptional quality of those records than it does about this debut, because the seeds are already here. A band with vision, dynamics, and, above all, potential. And you can hear it in every note, as if the Pumpkins already know they're going to become something bigger. They just don't know how big yet. At number 4, the Black Crowes with Shake Your Money Maker, an irresistible blend of southern rock, blues, and soul, delivered with a confidence that feels almost suspicious for a debut. Brothers Chris and Rich Robinson draw from the very best of American rock tradition and shape it into a sound that feels surprisingly timeless. This is not a typical 90s record. It could just as easily have come out in the 1970s. With clear echoes of British bands like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones, and a fiery Otis Redding cover of Hard to Handle, this debut sets the tone immediately. From Twice as Hard and Jealous Again to more stripped-down moments like She Talks to Angels, this album holds your attention effortlessly. What follows is a run of strong albums, interrupted by internal tensions that would pull the band apart more than once. But here, on this debut, everything still sounds unrestrained and pure, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. A debut that doesn't sound like a beginning, but like a band that's always been there. At number 3, The Laws with their one and only album, their self-titled debut. Liverpool has already written more than its share of music history, from Echo and the Bunnymen to Elvis Costello, and that one band that was kind of popular in the 60s. But this album deserves a place in that lineage, too. A band with just one record. But what a record! With the same jangly lightness as the Sundays and a flawless sense of melody, The Laws effortlessly string together one pop gem after another, from Doldrum to IOU, but in the end, it all comes down to There She Goes, a song that feels so natural, you almost forget how special it really is. Frontman Lee Maver's perfectionism would ultimately hold the band back from building on the success, turning this album from the beginning of something bigger into a one-time peak. And maybe that's exactly what makes it so valuable. Some bands build a career. The Laws captured a moment, and that turned out to be enough. At number 2, Seal with his self-titled debut, later commonly referred to as Seal 1, produced by Trevor Horn. And you can hear it in everything, a rich, layered sound, meticulously crafted down to the smallest detail. An opener like The Beginning is unmistakably a product of its time. Those early 90s house influences are hard to ignore, even a little dated. But the melody is simply too strong to truly age. With Crazy and Killer, Seal breaks through in one instant, and those two tracks are the key to the rest of the album. Because their lyrics return later, tying the record together thematically. The line, Only Child Knows from Crazy reappears in Whirlpool, while racism in among future kings can only lead to no good, from killer resurfaces in Future Love Paradise. It gives the album a sense of cohesion, less like a collection of songs and more like one continuous whole, with tracks like Deep Water and Violet. That level never drops. A debut that doesn't just introduce, but immediately defines. When you think of the early 90s, you think of grunge. And when you think of grunge, you think of Nirvana. You might expect Nevermind, but that's not even their debut. And so it's not my number one. That spot goes to Pearl Jam with 10. Because even though Nevermind would take grunge to a global audience, for me, the ultimate debut is right here. This is not a perfect record in sound and sequencing, but it does have the best songs, an album without weak moments. The songs are so well known, so strong, they barely need an introduction. What does stand out, though, is how 10 begins and ends. That slow, mysterious, almost distant opening, often referred to as master slave, with once only kicking in after nearly 40 seconds. It feels less immediate than you might expect. And on the other end, there's Release, which feels like a natural, fully formed opener, and often was in their live shows. Those bookends make the sequencing interesting, but not necessarily ideal. In fact, in that regard, this album scores lower than most others on this list, just to show that the triple S factor does matter.
Patent pending.
But the songs, they're simply too good. Because musically, everything works. The energy, the hooks, the interplay, and above all, the voice of Eddie Vedder. After 10, the band would continue to evolve and experiment, releasing strong and interesting albums, but never quite reaching this level again. This is where it all comes together. A debut that doesn't feel like a beginning, but like a peak. We started this list with 10, and we also end with it. Pearl Jam. Forever. And those were the 10 essential debut albums from 1990 and 1991. What's your number one? What would your list look like? Let me know in the comments and vote in the poll. I'm always curious to hear your take. Listen to all the music from this and other episodes via the Spotify playlist and follow the social channels for updates, because I will follow you. If you follow me, no Nirvana on this list, but you can find a deep dive into all their albums right here. Click the card and check out that video. Thanks for watching. See you next time. And in the meantime, drop the needle, press play, and remember, we're only in it for the music.